our job as leaders of nonprofit organizations is to constantly be gathering more information.
What are the secrets that drive the businesses you love or nonprofits you admire? Join us as we uncover the surprising ideas at the intersection of causes and brands. I'm Dave Rayleigh.
And I'm Carly Berna. Each episode, learn from leaders of nonprofits and companies that will give you insights that you can put into action. This is the Purpose and Profit Podcast. Season 6 of the Purpose and Profit Podcast is brought to you by Avid.
Welcome. Today, our guest is David Rhode. He's a seasoned nonprofit leader, brand strategist, and author. Before launching and scaling the award-winning nonprofit Pitch In for baseball and softball, David served early on in his career as brand manager at Procter Gamble. He holds an MBA from the Wharton School of Business and now teaches nonprofit branding and consulting at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the deputy director at PennPAC and founder of the nonprofit advisory firm .org. His new book, Passion Isn't Enough, won the Axiom Business Book Awards Gold Medal and is a practical guide that every nonprofit leader should read. Welcome to the show, David.
Dave, Carly, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
It's good to have you here. My question for you, my first question is, your book came out as we record this about almost 5 months ago. So you're almost a half a year into this marathon of having a book in the world. How does that feel?
Well, it feels great to have the book out there. As you know, we put a lot of time and effort into writing a book. And so there's a little surreal moment when you get to handle the book for the first time. But for me, the fun part has honestly been the feedback I'm getting from people that are reading the book, that it's having the intended impact. And, maybe, I don't know about you, but I had my doubts when I wrote it, like, will this be helpful? And I'm so delighted that it is having the desired effect and it is being valued by the people that spend the time to read it.
Yes. And just as a reminder for our listeners that the book is called Passion Isn't Enough. And yeah, David, I totally can relate. It reminds me of my old days building websites where you would just put so much effort into it. Although I would argue a book is more work than a website. But usually you have a team, and you finally get to the launch date and you're like, whew, good thing I'm done with this. And then you realize, wait a second, no, I think I'm at the starting line now.
Well, that's fair, because I would say that I kind of foolishly thought that when the book came out, my work was, I won't say done, but mostly done. And the sort of the book tour and the other stuff I'm doing to engage with people, whether it's, book clubs and small salon style leadership events and things like that nature, have been a lot of fun. But they've been, it's in the trenches. It's a lot of hand-to-hand combat and a lot of staying on top of it. And I'm delighted by it because I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. But I think maybe other authors who aren't comfortable being out there are probably a little surprised, like how much effort it takes to keep a book kind of front and center.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we will talk more about the book shortly, but I can completely relate, being just several months behind you in my own book's launch journey, but the work is worth it. I'll tell you that. That's for sure. So, David, you've had a diverse career, spanning nonprofit branding, strategic planning, consumer research. But I'm curious, way back when you were at Procter Gamble at P&G, how did that influence your approach to the way you think about nonprofit branding? And then just any lessons that came from that kind of consumer goods sector that come to mind?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. We all have DNA, things that are sort of informed and kind of create the lens that you look at the world. And my time at Procter Gamble really influenced who I am as a professional. That branding lens is something that I feel I've kept to this day. And it was something that really helped me when I was at Pitch In for baseball and softball, launching that organization. To me, I guess the lessons are, it's really important to differentiate yourself. There were a lot of laundry brands that were out there. I was leading one of them. And, why would they choose you? Your messaging, your packaging, all your story has to really point people in one direction or another, so that when people are thinking about that challenge or that particular problem that they're trying to solve, your organization resonates with them because they've heard about you and they've heard about you in this consistent way. So that piece of it is differentiation. And the other side that really informed me is Procter & Gamble is really based on the notion that if we talk to the consumers enough, then we will learn what's important to them. And so I feel that, our job as leaders of nonprofit organizations is to constantly be gathering more information. How do our donors perceive us? How do our staff perceive us? How do our volunteers perceive us? What is it about our work that keeps them coming back and kind of making sure we understand how our brand shows up for them? Because the brand is really the whole experience of your organization, and understanding what you think is happening on the inside may not be how it's being perceived on the outside. And the closer that you can get to sort of making sure those things kind of overlap is important. But maybe by talking to people on a more consistent basis, which is something I strongly recommend, you can identify opportunities or gaps and begin to fill those in. So research and talking to people who are really the consumer, that's a key piece of it. And then the differentiation, that's another key piece that really shaped me moving forward.
Yeah, thinking back to your P&G days, you mentioned laundry detergent. Maybe I'm curious, are there any little either stories or snippets of like, oh, we found that if we really accentuated this aspect, of the brand, we learned this and we applied that. Like, does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I worked on the Dawn brand, it was dishwashing liquid. And this was during the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and they were using Dawn dishwashing liquid to clean the birds that had been damaged. And so this became, and it has been since whatever amount of time it is, 30 plus years, that an association now between Dawn and bird rescue, that it is strong enough to solve this problem, but gentle enough that it won't harm the wildlife. And so that kind of a strategic partnership, that kind of way of bringing the brand's value proposition to life is really important, and became part of the brand story and really elevated the brand in many ways.
I love that. Yeah, that's. By the way, I'm pretty sure I remember that as a kid. Like, oh yeah, how nice. Dawn is saving lives.
It was, and we learned about it because the people that were the wildlife protection folks, the folks that were the bird rescuers, they were using the product. It wasn't like we were pushing it. They were using it organically. They had determined it was the best solution. So just sort of sharing their story and their perspective is the ultimate third-party testimonial, the endorsement, this good housekeeping seal kind of a thing that everybody's looking for their brand.
I just have like a fangirl P&G question because I am a huge P&G fan. When you said you worked on detergent, was it Dawn or did you work on like Tide or something?
I was on packaged soap and detergent. So that incorporated laundry detergent as well as dishwashing liquid, as well as dishwashing soap like Cascade. So I was on the Tide brand to start as a brand assistant. And then I was on the Dawn brand as an assistant brand manager. I got promoted, and then I got promoted to brand manager. I was on Era liquid laundry detergent. So our floor, where we made a lot of money for the company, those were the brands that were on our floor. But there were different floors. There's fabric softener, and then there was like personal care, and there was food, and there was other things. But I was in packaged soap and detergent.
Yeah,
best smelling floor in the building.
So great.
Yeah, I'm asking because one of my previous managers was the brand manager for Tide, and he always loves to tell the story about how he changed the color of the dot over the eye, and how long it took, and it was such like an extensive project to change the color and go through all the consumer research and everything, which I always thought was so fascinating because coming from the nonprofit world, we don't put that much time into branding,
Yeah, when you have a flagship brand like that, the level of scrutiny to every decision is different. I remember specifically there was a test market for a new version of the product, and it was also a really large package, so it was something that would be good for club stores and things like that. It ended up that it was being stored differently, like on its side. So, well, we normally think of the package and the logo as being what's the front and center of the package. You also saw the bottom of the box, and so my point I was making is, we need to dial up the logo communication on the bottom of the box because we're missing a big opportunity. But again, to do that became there's lots of eyes that get on a Tide package change. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of that, like I said, a lot of our listeners are nonprofits and they don't have a lot of resources when it comes to brand. What advice would you give to them about how you can still focus on that, even with a small pool of resources?
Yeah, I think this is about understanding who you are and trying to figure out in advance, like what you can be and what you can't be. So pitching for baseball and softball, we provided equipment to communities so that kids could play here in the United States and around the world. And so if you can sort of picture the old sort of terribly dated reference, the Groucho Marx thing, where like if you said equipment, like pitching for baseball would fall down, like they would make that level of association. So we were trying to make the association of pitching for baseball as a solution for equipment. And this took many forms. This was, communities that were devastated by natural disasters that needed equipment because they were flooded and things of that nature, or it was just far away places where they didn't have access to safe equipment. And so we helped kids in over 100 countries around the world. So we could have provided coaching support. We could have provided guidance around how to build fields in addition to being the equipment folks. But we felt it was important for us to sort of establish and then stay in our lane and then acknowledge that over time, this would build people would understand how we fit into the ecosystem, and they would think of us and come to us in ways that would be where we wanted to be. That didn't mean getting coaching support or help in building fields was not important. We identified mechanisms to provide those resources and directed people to other places they could go to get that kind of support. But that wasn't the kind of stuff that we would do. And so I think the lesson for other organizations, and everybody has a different perspective on this, is sometimes organizations continue to just expand their programming, and they get known for this, and all of a sudden there's 23 things that they're doing. And it's much harder for somebody to kind of keep in their mind, why would I think of this organization as compared to that organization? So I think we need to be really disciplined about how we expand our programs and kind of I think it's better to kind of go deep and be excellent at one thing or two things than it is to be all things to all people. One person's perspective.
Yeah. Well, and just if we were to bridge, let's bridge over to the book now. The title of the book is Passion Isn't Enough, Practical Guide for Nonprofit Leaders. Talk about an ambitious topic. You and I were talking about that offline, like how do you cover the gamut of what it looks like to lead a nonprofit? But it's in the title of the book. You emphasize the significance of passion in nonprofit leadership, and it's critical, but it's not sufficient. So how do you help nonprofit leaders balance the passion that I hope they have for their cause with the more strategic elements of running an organization, like, branding, fundraising, and board engagement?
Yeah, I mean, the book is structured to sort of identify 15 key roles and challenges that you're going to face in your role as a nonprofit leader. And then those chapters, basically grew out of the conversations I was having with leaders over the course of my career initially, and then sort of the last 5 years as a nonprofit consultant focusing on CEO coaching and mentoring. So, I needed to organize the book to kind of make sense of it. But those functional areas are the things that leaders need to be good at. They need to be good at cultivating partnerships. They need to be good at creating cost controls and budgeting. They need to be good at hiring people. They need to be good at communications. They need to be good at engaging their board and fundraising and strategic planning. Well, realistically, when somebody comes into this sector or comes into this role, they don't have all that experience or all of those skills. And so most likely what brought them into the nonprofit sector is a particular passion for a cause, for helping a certain audience of people, whatever. And that's fine. Like that's almost, vital to kind of keep you going. There's a lot of reasons to think that the nonprofit sector might not be for everybody. You maybe make less money. There's also these challenges with funding, things of that nature. So if you're not kind of internally motivated and passionate about something, the likelihood that you're going to have a long career seems like it would be less. But what I would want people to understand is this totality of skills and competencies that you need to have in order to thrive. And so while passion can sort of be at the center of your bingo card, it can't be the only square that you're going to cover over the course of your journey through leading an organization. Which elements of the other skills you need is really just a function of where you are at a moment in time within your organization. And so I wouldn't throw like all 15 things at somebody at the same time and think, hey, you need to do all of these things. No. There's a logic to it. And, that's why strategic planning is the first chapter in the book, because the organization needs a roadmap. I feel personally that the board is the second most critical piece that you need to put in place, because that has such long-standing implications for attracting resources and things like that. And then fundraising is the third chapter. So those are kind of, to me, the three pillars of the organization. But so many of these other things, the branding and the communication, are critical if we're going to help people remember who we are, help them care about the organization in the way we want them to, so that they ultimately take the action that we're seeking, which is providing financial support or some other type of support that's critical for the organization to have its intended effect in its community.
So 15 core areas, challenges that leaders face, in nonprofit leadership, starting with the big three: strategic planning, board, your board, building your board relationships, and fundraising. And so I'm curious, is the book, is it read cover to cover kind of book? Are you finding that people are just, jumping into the specific area that's most relevant to them in that moment? What are you hearing from folks?
Well, I encourage people in the introduction to say, go where you're experiencing the most pain, like go to where you need to go now. If you're hiring people for the first time, then go to the chapter on hiring. If there's a chapter on crisis communication, there's things which different leaders are facing at different times. I think there's a logic to going front to back, but I don't think it's required. I think it's a book that can be, it's meant to be accessible. It's meant to be, it's in language that people feel comfortable reading and they understand. And it's also extremely actionable. Like each chapter has some actionable next steps at the end of it. So you would know, like, what do I do now that I've read this chapter? What's the next one or two things? And sometimes it's have this conversation with your board president, or have this conversation with a staff member, or how to continue this and put it to work for you. So, I think people are kind of mostly reading it front to back, but I think you're not losing something per se. This is not fiction. So you're not missing character development if you kind of jump to page 150 and go to whatever chapter that lands you in.
Just kind of staying on the topic of the book, you talk in the book about 3 Ps: people, process, and proof. Can you give kind of like a elevator pitch of what those are? And then, of course, they can go to the book to get the rest of the information, and why this would really impact smaller nonprofits.
For sure. So we're taught sort of in school about the 4 Ps of marketing, price, product, place, and promotion. And those to a great degree are also present in the nonprofit sector. But these other 3 Ps are maybe more specific to, and in some ways more helpful to, the nonprofit organization when they're building their brand. So they're people, proof, and process. People. So let's think about people for a second. Who's telling our message as a nonprofit organization? We don't have a marketing budget. We're not buying national advertising. We're not buying billboards. We're not doing all these other things. The people that are carrying the message forward are staff members, our volunteers, our board members. What kind of messaging do they have at their disposal and to tell our story in a succinct way? So our job as leaders is to kind of really coach them around that proper elevator pitch, give them those 1 or 2 stories that kind of bring the organization to life, so that if 12 different board members are telling the story, it sounds more similar than different. I want them to all customize it and make it sort of their own version of it, but the guts of it should be the same. So our job as leaders is to really make sure we're training people around how to carry that message forward, because we want them to. That's one of the main ways other people come to the community, is through this word of mouth advertising. So that's really where people comes in. Proof is about, our measurement and evaluation. Do we have data that says that our organization is having its intended impact? every organization, whether it's stated or implied, has some version of a theory of change. Because of the work we're doing, a certain population is going to be, I would assume, improved as a result of our programs. And so whatever that improvement means for each organization doesn't matter. It matters that we understand it and that we're measuring it in some way, shape, or form. And we can come back and talk about some of those specific strategies to do that. But what we're looking for is one or two key pieces of data that kind of underscores that our organization is working in the way you think. Because you as a potential donor or you as a potential partner, you have lots of choices. You could donate to lots of organizations. You could partner with lots of nonprofit organizations if you're a corporation. You're going to want to partner or be more inclined to partner with an organization whose program is being demonstrated to be effective. And so we have to incorporate some version of proof into our telling of who we are. Now, many organizations will rely on testimonials and anecdotes and things of that nature. What's been proven is the combination of some hard data as well as those anecdotes is sort of the best possible practice. Because even if we have facts, people are maybe inclined once in a while to forget facts. They're really inclined to remember stories. But if we can tell the stories in conjunction with some facts, it is the right powerful combination. And then process. And process doesn't necessarily apply to every organization, but it's kind of the way we do our programming. Some organizations have a unique mechanism for doing the work they do. And so there's an organization local in New York that we've supported through PenPack called Bloom Again Brooklyn. And what they do is they reduce social isolation for elderly, and they do that by providing them with flowers. And these are flowers, if you go to a party or a wedding and this, that, and the other thing, what happens to those flowers after they get repurposed? Or when a grocery store maybe has things go past their expiration as a flower, but it still looks really pretty. They get these flowers and they turn them around and they put them to good use. Well, imagine the process to deal with something as perishable as flowers. So for this organization, when you understand the nuance of how it goes about their work, then you start to see how kind of like meticulous and how professional they are. At Pitching for Baseball and Softball, when people came to our warehouse and saw how we broke down the equipment and how we fulfilled orders to make sure that leagues got exactly the stuff they were needing, then people really understood that the organization was operating at a much different level, much more professionally than they might have imagined before they saw our warehouse. So sometimes that process can really elevate your brand story. And that's why people, proof, and process are added to the 4 Ps to create the 7 Ps of nonprofit branding.
Okay. Yeah. And I just processing through myself, thinking through this, right? I think your point about people, one of the things that comes to mind is just how much of organizational branding today in general is about people with the, influencer economy or whatever you want to call it, right? So many of those, and it's not just the executive directors, it is those frontline staff that are a part of putting that brand into the world, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's the social media community. So like if somebody's following you on Instagram or TikTok or this, that, and the other, if you have messaging that's going out that's consistent over time, then even those individuals who you don't have direct contact with can still tell your story and share your story and explain it to somebody else in a way that's going to be relevant. So yeah, I think yes, it's both this one-on-one stuff and it's also using the platforms to amplify our messages, which social media can be.
For over 40 years, Dickerson Baker has been a trusted partner to nonprofits across the country and globe. They've worked with thousands of organizations and helped raise billions of dollars to support meaningful missions. Their expertise spans fundraising, leadership development, and strategic growth. Dickerson Baker, advancing nonprofits. Share helps Christian nonprofits shine with innovative marketing and digital fundraising. But that's not all. They're your tech-savvy partner, building tools to make your work easier and your impact bigger. Ready to grow your mission? Visit sharetalent.co today. Well, then on the topic of proof, you talk about measurement and evaluation being one of the most unsolved problems in the nonprofit sector. What are some of the more, innovative ways that you've seen nonprofits begin to prove their impact, especially if they don't have don't have huge resources?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've touched on a key area because this is one of the bigger gaps for most organizations. In my nonprofit branding class I teach, I include Jim Collins's book Good to Great in the Social Sector, and Collins uses the example of the Cleveland Orchestra and how the Cleveland Orchestra. So you're an orchestra. How are you going to measure your impact? Think about it. And they started tracking things like the number of standing ovations they had for their performances, and the number of times they were invited to play at other festivals and concert halls and things of that nature. So taking things that are inherently hard to measure, like artistic excellence, and trying to drill down and get them to the point where they can be sort of counted. I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is to not look at this as something that has to be done scientifically. Even though we're looking for hard data. What I mean by that is, let's say you're helping kids in 25 schools and you're helping 5,000 kids with your program. You don't need to measure 5,000 kids in order to have a measurement and evaluation program. You don't have to be measuring it in each of the 25 schools. You can try to, as scientifically as you can, identify schools which you think represent generally the kinds of communities, the kinds of kids that you're trying to help. And then you're going to take maybe not every grade, maybe you measure third graders and sixth graders or something of that nature where you can kind of wrap your arms around it. And so in 3 or 4 schools, you're measuring kids in a couple of grades. And maybe it's on an app on a phone where you're asking 3 or 4 questions that says, before you started within our program, could you please address how you feel about your confidence or your resilience or your ability to solve problems or whatever the thing is that matters to your organization, whatever it is that you're trying to move in the needle for your theory of change. So I think we can take advantage of technology, take advantage of measuring cohorts of people. And what I've learned and what I've experienced in many conversations with funders is they just want to see there's a logic behind your measurement and evaluation. They're not going to destroy you because it's not, somehow nationally representative sample of X and Y and Z and 20,000 households have weighed in on this. What they want to know is that you're measuring things consistently, you're measuring them logically, and that the data that you have is good data. And I think that we can do that in ways that doesn't overwhelm us, that is within our means, both in terms of people and cost. So as long as we have a good thought process, and this could change over time, we could get better at this. It's not like we're going to get it right the first time. But I think it's important to begin to measure as early as you can, and to get a rigor around this idea that we are going to continually try to refine our programs, and we'll do that by knowing if they're working, and then we're going to have hard data to back up, so funders can understand that our work is having a desired impact. You don't need 75 questions. You need the right questions, and you need to ask them before the program, and you need to ask them after the program, so that you can see if you've moved the needle on the key things that are relevant to your organization. And it's really just logic. And I think, again, the benefit of being in 2025 is there's so many things that we can do with simple surveys and technology that's handheld, that we can get data that we couldn't have gotten years and years before.
Well, and it sounds like you're, in some ways, at least with proof, you're advocating for not complicated, 1 to 2 metrics that really sort of undergird, give that quote unquote proof that your programming is effective, right?
That's exactly right. I don't think we need to overcomplicate things. We don't need 73 data points that says this is our program's working. If we're trying to help kids feel more confident, like what would that look like? If we're trying to help kids read better, like what would that look like? How many books did you read? How do you feel about a book? How much time do you spend reading now versus how much time do you spend reading later? Whatever those numbers could be for a particular organization, and sometimes it's outputs and sometimes it's outcomes. But more rigor around this is better than less rigor. But we need to right size it for every organization so that we have the ability to do it not just once. We're not going to measure this just one time. We're going to be measuring this over time so that we can know that our stuff is still working and still relevant.
Yeah. That's great, David. Well, before we always like to end every interview with some lightning round questions, which Carly will ask you in a minute. But before we go there, I just want you to kind of go back and think about yourself, when you're running pitch in for baseball and softball, you're in the nonprofit seat, right? What is one piece of advice that you received while you were there, or even since, that you've come across, or one concept that you wish you knew early on in your nonprofit leadership journey?
I wish I knew earlier what the kinds of conversations I should be having with board members before they became board members.
Okay.
So
Unpack.
yeah. So, in the beginning, maybe we tell people, oh, I'm starting a nonprofit organization, or I'm leading a nonprofit organization, and this is what we do. And they go, oh, I'd love to help you. I'd love to join your board. And you say, oh, that's great. Yeah, let's do it. And then all of a sudden they're a board member, like you just bought them a drink and now they've made a decision to become a board member. And so what I learned over time is really committing the roles and responsibilities to paper. It was a 3-page document which outlined what it meant to be a board member with our organization, how much time was going to be involved, what the financial commitment was, what it meant to show up as a brand ambassador. And we had a board retreat that was required, and all the other things. Like, are these the kinds of things you would feel comfortable doing? And kind of going through it point by point, and then asking questions like, have you ever raised money before? It's one thing to say, oh, I'll do it. It's like, have you done it? How'd you feel about it? And if you haven't, are you going to be comfortable going to people that are friends and family of yours, professional colleagues of yours, and asking them to financially support an organization that means a lot to you? And you can get a feel for how comfortable they are with this particular topic, or how much support they might need along the way to become comfortable. But those conversations happening in advance of them getting in the board is way better than figuring out somebody isn't going to fundraise, doesn't have the time, this, that, and the other. So I would have really benefited from having a tutorial on board development before I got involved. I didn't, there were 3 versions of the board. There was the first one, which is friends and family. Then it became slightly more professional. And then it became more the representative board that it needed to be. But that was, 5-6 years down the line. And it took a couple of times to get it right. And, I learned along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great insight. Like Dave said, we love to end every episode with a lightning round. So we have about 6 questions. So just think of the first thing that comes to your mind and share that, because they're probably not ones you prepared for. So the first one is, if you could instantly become an expert in any skill, what would it be?
I'd like to be better at Canva, personally. I'd like to be able to demonstrate how visually have my stuff look so awesome, because when people can tell a story visually, it's so much more impactful.
I love that. I wish I was also better at Canva. Second, what's your guilty pleasure TV show or movie?
Boy, that's so tough. I mean, I love them all. Guilty pleasure. Queer Eye. I love Queer Eye. I cry like a baby by the end of every episode of Queer Eye. It gets me every time. It's formulaic, but the way that they engage people and support people and get to know them in this short amount of time, and I realize there's a lot of editing involved, it gets me every time. Yeah. And so I can't wait for whenever the new season is. I immediately go don't bother me. Yeah. I'm in Queer Eye mode.
That's funny. Mine is Great British Baking Show, and it's also totally. Don't bother me.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could donate $1 million to any cause, what would it be?
I think the mental health crisis that people are experiencing and students are experiencing, the pressures they feel when they go off to college, or about getting into college, and that pressure around that. And it's sensitive to me because my daughter's a high school senior. So I would love to see just more support for kids as they are entering that space and there. So they understand it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to not living with everybody else's expectations. And so I'd want to see that. That's the first thought that came to mind.
Yeah, that's great. What's the most random thing on your bucket list?
The most random thing on my bucket list. I would like to do a TED Talk, but I want. It's not random. I want to go to the Olympics. I want to see the Olympics in person. I've been a huge fan of the Olympics since I was a kid, but I've never found my way there, and so I'd like to fix that.
Summer or winter?
Summer, track and field. but everything else too. Like there's no bad sport. And I love curling. The Winter Olympics, if you can, I was visiting a friend in Minnesota and we went to visit like a curling rink and it was like, I was in heaven.
Oh yeah. Sign me up.
So I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm from Wisconsin, and that guy that won the curling gold or whatever is from Upper Wisconsin. So I feel very connected to the curling.
Home state.
100%.
Yeah. What's a surprising fact about you that most people wouldn't guess?
I had an over hour-long conversation with a living president.
Which one?
Well, George W. Bush was a huge baseball fan, and we were able to coordinate an in-person meeting with him when I was leading pitching for baseball and softball. I sat right next to him. Well, I first sat in his chair. I sat in, which was
sorry, Mr. President.
It was like a chair he had taken out of the cabinet room, and I sit down for this meeting. I am not a nervous person. I was nervous before this conversation, right? So we get through the Secret Service and all this other stuff, and then I sit down in his chair. And he goes, in his way of talking, oh, that's my chair. And so I got up and sat next to him. But we just sat next to each other and had this lovely conversation for 70 minutes about kids playing baseball and the growth of the organization and what it could look and feel like. And just that was surreal for me. It was really special.
That's awesome. If you could switch lives with anyone for a day, who would it be? Not George Bush.
I wouldn't mind being a professional golf, like seeing how Rory McIlroy can drive the golf ball as a long-time golfer who barely hits the ball out of his shadow sometimes. I would love to be able to hit the ball like 371 yards like he did on the first hole at Augusta on Saturday. Like that feeling of connecting with the ball and having it just launch into orbit is not something I'm ever going to experience in my life unless I change places with him or another pro golfer.
That's a good one. We've asked this question just this season and nobody's mentioned an athlete. I think that would be, don't want to do all the work to get to where they are, but I just want to be at that pinnacle already.
I want the cheat code to be able to do it. I'm not going to get there through the right channels. I want to get there through some side door.
I love it. Me too. I'll take that. So David, thank you for being with us. Thanks for candidly investing years of your life in putting this book together. You're clearly investing in the next generation through your teaching efforts, but you're wanting to equip nonprofit leaders. And I admire that. And thank you for taking the time to put that together and for sharing it with our audience today.
My pleasure. I think nonprofit leadership is so important. I think executive directors are just doing the most important work, and they need all the support they can get, and especially need it at this point in time. So I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate your kind words, and look forward to helping more folks down the road.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you for our listeners. I hope you've learned something today. I hope you've been challenged. You've been inspired. And if you're looking for David, you can look for David Rhode, R-H-O-D-E, and you can look for his book, Passion Isn't Enough. So thank you, David.
Thank you, guys.
We want to thank all of our sponsors for supporting Season 6 of the Purpose and Profit podcast, including Virtuous, Faith Search Partners, Dickerson Baker, Share, Synergy, Avid, and Imago Consulting. For more episodes of the Purpose and Profit podcast, visit purposeandprofitpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love it if you would rate the show and write us a review. Follow the show on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. You can also sign up for our email newsletter to get the latest updates. Thanks for listening.